Welcome to Week 6. This week we will discuss performance appraisals, training and development, and privacy on the job. A performance appraisal is a review of an employee's performance in which, ideally, an employer recognizes the employee's accomplishments, provides feedback on how to improve performance. Effective performance appraisal systems contain two basic systems operating in conjunction: an evaluation system and a feedback system. The main aim of the evaluation system is to identify the performance gap, if any. This gap is the shortfall that occurs when performance does not meet the standards set by the organization as acceptable. The main aim of the feedback system is to inform the employee about the quality of his or her performance. However, the information flow is not exclusively one way. The appraisers also receive feedback from the employee about job problems. One of the best ways to appreciate the purposes of performance appraisal is to look at it from the different viewpoints of the main stakeholders, the employee and the organization. From the employee viewpoint, the purpose of performance appraisal is fourfold. 1. Tell me what you want me to do. 2. Tell me how well I've done it. 3. Help me improve my performance. And 4. Reward me for doing well. From the organization's viewpoint, one of the most important reasons for having a system of performance appraisal is to establish and uphold the principle of accountability. For decades, it has been known to researchers that one of the chief causes of organizational failure is non-alignment of responsibility and accountability. Non-alignment occurs where employees are given responsibilities and duties, but are not held accountable for the way in which those responsibilities and duties are performed. What typically happens is that several individuals or work units appear to have overlapping roles. The overlap allows, indeed actively encourages, each individual or business unit to pass the buck to the others. Ultimately, in the severely non-aligned system, no one is accountable for anything. In this event, the principle of accountability breaks down completely. Organizational failure is the only possible outcome. In cases where the non-alignment is not so severe, the organization may continue to function, albeit inefficiently. Like a poorly made or badly tuned engine, the non-aligned organization may run, but it will be sluggish, costly, and unreliable. One of the principal aims of performance appraisal is to make people accountable. The objective is to align responsibility and accountability at every organizational level. In a landmark study, Loescher and Thiel in 1977 found that the three most common appraisal methods in general use are rating scales at 56%, essay methods at 25%, and results-oriented or MBO methods at 13%. The rating scale method offers a high degree of structure for appraisals. Each employee trait or characteristic is rated on a bipolar scale that usually has several points ranging from poor to excellent. The traits assessed on these scales include employee attributes such as cooperation, communication, ability, initiative, punctuality, and technical competence. The nature and scope of the traits selected for inclusion is limited only by the imagination of the scale's designer or by the organization's need to know. The one major provision in selecting traits is that they should be in some way relevant to their appraisee's job. The traits selected by some organizations have been unwise and have resulted in legal action on the grounds of discrimination. The greatest advantage of rating scales is that they are structured and standardized. This allows ratings to be easily compared and contrasted, even for entire workforces. Each employee is subjected to the same basic appraisal process and rating criteria, but the same range of responses. This encourages equality in treatment for all appraisees and opposes standard measures of performance across all parts of the organization. Rating scale methods are easy to use and understand. The concept of the rating scale makes obvious sense Both appraisers and appraisees have an intuitive appreciation for the simple and effective logic of the bipolar scale. The result is widespread acceptance and popularity for this approach. Disadvantages revolve around trait relevance, systemic disadvantage, perceptual errors, perceived meaning, and rating errors. Trait relevance. Are the selected rating scale traits clearly relevant to the jobs of all the appraisees? Is it inevitable that with a standardized and fixed system of appraisal, that certain traits will have a greater relevance in some jobs than others? For example, the trait initiative may not be very important in a job that is tightly defined and rigidly structured. In such cases, a low appraisal rating for initiative may not mean that an employee lacks initiative. Rather, it may reflect the fact that an employee has few opportunities to use and display that particular trait. The relevance of rating scales is therefore said to be context sensitive. Job and workplace circumstances must be taken into account. Systemic disadvantage. Rating scales, and the traits they purport to measure, generally attempt to encapsulate all the relevant indicators of employee performance. There is an assumption that all the true and best indicators of performance are included, and all false and irrelevant indicators are excluded. This is an assumption very difficult to prove in practice. It is possible that an employee's performance may depend on factors that have not been included in the selected traits. Such employees may end up with ratings that do not truly or fairly reflect their effort or value to the organization. Employees in this class are systemically disadvantaged by the rating scale method. Perceptual errors. This includes various well-known problems of selective perception, such as the horns and halos effect, as well as problems of perceived meaning. Selective perception is the human tendency to make private and highly subjective assessments of what a person is really like, and then seek evidence to support the view. This is a common and normal psychological phenomenon. All human beings are affected by it. In other words, we see in others what we want to see in them. An example is a supervisor who believes that an employee is inherently good and so ignores evidence that might suggest otherwise. Instead of correcting the slackening employee, the supervisor covers for them and may even offer excuses for their declining performance. On the other hand, a supervisor may have formed the impression that an employee is bad. The supervisor becomes unreasonably harsh in their assessment of the employee and always ready to criticize and undermine them. The horns and halo effect is rarely seen in its extreme and obvious forms, but in its most subtle manifestations, it can be a significant threat to the effectiveness and credibility of performance appraisals. Perceived meaning. Problems of perceived meaning occur when appraisers do not share the same opinion about the meaning of the selected traits and the language used on the rating scales. For example, to one appraiser, an employee may demonstrate the trait of initiative by reporting work problems to a supervisor. To another appraiser, that might suggest an excessive dependence on supervisory assistance, and thus a lack of initiative. As well, the language and terms used to construct a scale, such as performance exceeds expectations or below average skill, may mean different things to different appraisers. And finally, rating errors. The problem here is not so much errors in perception as errors in appraiser judgment and motive. Unlike perceptual errors, these errors may be deliberate. The most common rating error is central tendency. Busy appraisers, or those wary of confrontations and repercussions, may be tempted to dole out too many passive, middle-of-the-road ratings, regardless of the actual performance of a subordinate. Thus, the spread of ratings tend to clump excessively around the middle of the scale. This problem is worsened in organizations where the appraisal process does not enjoy strong management support or where the appraisers do not feel confident with the task of appraisal. In the essay method approach, the appraiser prepares a written statement about the employee being appraised. The statement usually concentrates on describing specific strengths and weaknesses in job performance. It also suggests courses of action to remedy the identified problem areas. The statement may be written and edited by the appraiser alone, or it may be composed in collaboration with the appraisee. The essay method is far less structured and confining than the rating scale method. permits the appraiser to examine almost any relevant issue or attribute of a performance. This contrasts sharply with methods where the appraisal criteria are rigidly defined. Appraisers may place whatever degree of emphasis on issues or attributes they feel appropriate. Thus, the process is open-ended and very flexible. The appraiser is not locked into an appraisal system that limits expression or assumes that employee traits can be neatly dissected and scaled. Essay methods are time-consuming and difficult to administer. Appraisers often find the essay technique more demanding than methods such as rating scales. The technique's greatest advantage, freedom of expression, is also its greatest handicap. The varying rating skills of appraisers can upset and distort the whole process. The process is subjective, and in consequence, it is difficult to compare and contrast the results of individuals or to draw any broad conclusions about organizational needs. The use of management objectives was first widely advocated in the 1950s by the noted management theorist Peter Drucker. MBO methods of performance appraisal are results-oriented. That is, they seek to measure employee performance by examining the extent to which predetermined work objectives have been met. Usually, the objectives are established jointly by the supervisor and subordinate. An example of an objective for a sales manager might be increase the gross monthly sales volume to $250,000 by June 30th. Once an objective is agreed, the employee is usually expected to self-audit, that is, to identify the skills needed to achieve the objective. Typically, they do not rely on others to locate and specify their strengths and weaknesses. They are expected to monitor their own development and progress. Advantages of MBO. The MBO approach overcomes some of the problems that arise as a result of assuming that the employee traits needed for job success can be reliably identified and measured. Instead of assuming traits, the MBO method concentrates on actual outcomes. If the employee meets or exceeds the set objectives, then he or she has demonstrated an acceptable level of job performance. Employees are judged according to real outcomes and not on their potential for success or on someone's subjective opinion of their abilities. The guiding principle of the MBO approach is that direct results can be observed, whereas the traits and attributes of employees must be guessed or inferred. The MBO method recognizes the fact that it is difficult to neatly dissect all the complex and varied elements that go to make up employee performance. MBO advocates claim that the performance of employees cannot be broken up into so many constituent parts, as one might take apart an engine to study. But put all the parts together and the performance may be directly observed and measured. MBO methods of performance appraisal can give employees a satisfying sense of autonomy and achievement, but on the downside, they can lead to unrealistic expectations about what can and cannot be reasonably accomplished. Supervisors and subordinates must have very good reality checking skills to use MBO appraisal methods. They will need these skills during the initial stage of objective setting and for the purposes of self-auditing and self-monitoring. Unfortunately, research studies have shown repeatedly that human beings tend to lack the skills needed to do their own reality checking. Nor are these skills easily conveyed by training. Reality itself is an intensely personal experience, prone to all forms of perceptual bias. One of the strengths of the MBO method is the clarity of purpose that flows from a set of well-articulated objectives. But this can be a source of weakness also. It has become very apparent that the modern organization must be flexible to survive. Objectives, by their very nature, tend to impose a certain rigidity. Of course, the obvious answer is to make the objectives more fluid and yielding. But the penalty for fluidity is loss of clarity. Variable objectives may cause employee confusion. It is also possible that fluid objectives may be distorted to disguise or justify failures in performance. Certain techniques in performance appraisal have been thoroughly investigated, and some have been found to yield better results than others. Encourage discussion. Research studies show that employees are likely to feel more satisfied with their appraisal result if they have the chance to talk freely and to discuss their performance. It is also more likely that such employees will be better able to meet future performance goals. Employees are also more likely to feel that the appraisal process is fair if they are given a chance to talk about their performance. This is especially so when they are permitted to challenge and appeal against their evaluation. Constructive intention. It is very important that employees recognize that negative appraisal feedback is provided with a constructive intention, for example, to help them overcome present difficulties and to improve their future performance. Employees will be less anxious about criticism and more likely to find it useful when they believe that the appraiser's intentions are helpful and constructive. In contrast, other studies have reported that destructive criticism, which is vague, ill-informed, unfair, or harsh, will lead to problems such as anger, resentment, tension, and workplace conflict, as well as increased resistance to improvement, denial of problems, and poorer performance. Set performance goals. It has been shown in numerous studies that goal setting is an important element in employee motivation. Goals can stimulate employee effort, focus attention, increase persistence, and encourage employees to find new and better ways to work. The usefulness of goals as a stimulus to human motivation is one of the best supported theories in management. It is also quite clear that goals which are specific, difficult, and accepted by employees will lead to higher levels of performance than easy, vague goals or no goals at all. Appraiser credibility. It is important that the appraiser be well-informed and credible. Appraisers should feel comfortable with the techniques of appraisal and should be knowledgeable about the employee's job performance. When these conditions exist, employees are more likely to view the appraisal process as accurate and fair. They also express more acceptance of the appraiser's feedback and a greater willingness to change. Employers should provide training to supervisors and others who conduct performance appraisals. Persons conducting appraisals must be thoroughly familiar with the job in question and the work of the persons being evaluated. There are times when coworkers participate in appraising performance. This can be in a form of a peer review or a 360-degree performance review. Employers can and should hold disabled employees to the same standards of performance as non-disabled employees who do the same job. Performance criteria and standards must be applied in a consistent manner. Should also be as specific and objective as possible. Overall performance ratings should be avoided unless they are based on ratings for more specific criteria that are then combined in a reasonable manner. Criteria should be established and known to employees beforehand. Maintaining documentation of performance that is independent of and goes beyond supervisors' ratings and performance appraisals is crucial. Performance appraisals should be job-related and consistent with business necessity. Appraisers explain behaviors that are the basis for ratings, citing specific instances of poor performance. Employers should not attempt to avoid unpleasant confrontations by failing to provide employees with feedback about their performance and opportunities to improve performance that are routinely provided to other employees. Perhaps the most significant benefit of appraisal is that, in the rush and bustle of daily working life, it offers a rare chance for a supervisor and subordinate to have time out for a one-on-one discussion of important work issues that might not otherwise be addressed. Almost universally, where performance appraisal is conducted properly, both supervisors and subordinates have reported the experience as beneficial and positive. Appraisal offers a valuable opportunity to focus on work activities and goals, to identify and correct existing problems, and to encourage better future performance. Thus, the performance on the whole organization is enhanced. For many employees, an official appraisal interview may be the only time they get to have exclusive, uninterrupted access to their supervisor. Said one employee of a large organization after his first formal performance appraisal, "In 20 years of work, that's the first time anyone has ever bothered to sit down and tell me how I'm doing." The value of this intense and purposeful interaction between a supervisor and subordinate should not be underestimated. Motivation and satisfaction. Performance appraisal can have a profound effect on levels of employee motivation and satisfaction, for better as well as for worse. Performance appraisal provides employees with recognition for their work efforts. The power of social recognition as an incentive has been long noted. In fact, there is evidence that human beings will even prefer negative recognition in preference to no recognition at all. If nothing else, the existence of an appraisal program indicates to an employee that the organization is genuinely interested in their individual performance and development. This alone can have a positive influence on the individual's sense of worth, commitment, and belonging. The strength and prevalence of this natural human desire for individual recognition should not be overlooked. Absenteeism and turnover rates in some organizations might be greatly reduced if more attention were paid to it. Regular performance appraisal, at least, is a good start. Recruitment and induction. Appraisal data can be used to monitor the success of the organization's recruitment and induction practices. For example, how well are the employees performing who were hired in the past 2 years? Appraisal data can also be used to monitor the effectiveness of changes in recruitment strategies. By following the yearly data related to new hires, it is possible to assess whether the general quality of the workforce is improving, staying steady, or declining. Employee evaluation. Though often understated or even denied, evaluation is a legitimate and major objective of performance appraisal. But the need to evaluate is also an ongoing source of tension, since evaluative and developmental priorities appear to frequently clash. Yet, at its most basic level, performance appraisal is the process of examining and evaluating the performance of an individual. Though organizations have a clear right, some would say a duty, to conduct such evaluations of performance, many still recoil from the idea. To them, the explicit process of judgment can be dehumanizing and demoralizing, and a source of anxiety and distress to employees. It has been said by some that appraisal cannot serve the needs of evaluation and development at the same time. It must be one or the other. But there may be an acceptable middle ground, where the need to evaluate employees objectively and the need to encourage and develop them can be balanced. Training and development. Performance appraisal offers an excellent opportunity, perhaps the best that will ever occur, for a supervisor and subordinate to recognize and agree upon individual training and development needs. During the discussion of an employee's work performance, the presence or absence of work skills can become very obvious, even to those who habitually reject the idea of training for them. Performance appraisals can make the need for training more pressing and relevant by linking it clearly to performance outcomes and future career aspirations. From the point of view of the organization as a whole, consolidated appraisal data can form a picture of the overall demand for training. This data may be analyzed by variables such as sex, department, etc. In this respect, performance appraisal can provide a regular and efficient training needs audit for the entire organization. Training programs teach employees how to do their jobs or increase employee skills and abilities. Development programs help employees further their careers through learning and improving abilities. Employees must be paid for required training that occurs during work hours. Employers must not discriminate in selecting employees for training. Employers should choose trainers carefully, ascertain what they are going to do before they do it, and carefully evaluate their performance. Training is legally required under many OSHA guidelines and the Drug-Free Workplace Act. Go to the supporting lesson links to the web or other media tab to learn more about MSDS. Training and development can be initiated for a variety of reasons for an employee or group of employees. For example, when a performance appraisal indicates performance improvement is needed, to benchmark the status of improvement so far in a performance improvement effort, as part of an overall professional development program, as part of succession planning to help an employee be eligible for a planned change in role in the organization, to pilot or test the operation of a new performance management system, or to train about a specific topic. Many companies train employees on a wide range of topics. For example, communications. The increasing diversity of today's workforce brings a wide variety of languages and customs. Computer skills. Computer skills are becoming a necessity for conducting administrative and office tasks. Customer service. Increased competition in today's global marketplace makes it critical that employees understand and meet the needs of customers. Diversity. Diversity training usually includes explanation about how people have different perspectives and views and includes techniques to value diversity. Ethics. Today's society has increasing expectations about corporate social responsibility. Also, today's diverse workforce brings a wide variety of values and morals to the workplace. Human relations. The increased stresses of today's workplace can include misunderstandings and conflict. Training can help people to get along in the workplace. Quality initiatives. Initiatives such as total quality management, quality circles, benchmarking, etc. require basic training about quality concepts, guidelines, and standards for quality. Safety. Safety training is critical where working with heavy equipment, hazardous chemicals, repetitive activities, etc., but can also be useful with practical advice for avoiding assaults. And sexual harassment. Sexual harassment training usually includes careful description of the organization's policies about sexual harassment, especially about what are inappropriate behaviors. There are numerous sources of online information about training and development. Several of these sites suggest reasons for supervisors to conduct training among employees. These reasons include increased job satisfaction and morale among employees, increased employee motivation, increased efficiencies in processes resulting in financial gain, increased capacity to adopt new technologies and methods, increased innovation in strategies and products, reduced employee turnover, enhanced company image, and risk management. There are several legal protections that allow us workplace privacy. Constitutional protections can be found in the Fourth Amendment, unreasonable search or seizure. Common law protections include privacy torts, intrusion upon seclusion, public disclosure of private facts, placement in a false light, appropriation of name or likeness, defamation, false imprisonment, infliction of emotional distress. Statutory protections include the Privacy Act, Electronic Communications Privacy Act, Employee Polygraph Protection Act, Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, Americans with Disabilities Act, Occupational Safety and Health Act, and National Labor Relations Act. A privacy tort is a body of common law that allows the plaintiff to obtain compensation from the defendant. Intrusion upon seclusion is the intentional intrusion into the solitude of private affairs of a person when that intrusion would be considered highly offensive to a reasonable person. Public disclosure of privacy facts is the broad publication of the private facts of a person's life when those facts are of no legitimate concern to the public, and this disclosure would be highly offensive to a reasonable person. Placement in a false light is a broad publication of information falsely attributing characteristics, conduct, or beliefs to a person when the individual publishing the information knew or should have known that it was false and being placed before the public in such a false light would be highly offensive to a reasonable person. Appropriation of a name or likeness is the unauthorized use of a person's name or likeness for the user's own commercial or other ends. In the next 3 slides, you will see elements of a claim related to these privacy torts. An intrusion on seclusion claim is a special form of invasion of privacy. It applies when someone intentionally intrudes, physically or otherwise, upon the solitude or seclusion of another. In most states, to make out an intrusion on seclusion claim, a plaintiff must generally establish 4 elements. First, that the defendant, without authorization, must have intentionally invaded the private affairs of the plaintiff. Second, the invasion must be offensive to a reasonable person. Third, the matter that the defendant intruded upon must involve a private matter. And finally, the intrusion must have caused mental anguish or suffering to the plaintiff. With respect to the first element of an intrusion claim, intentional invasion into the private affairs of another, courts generally require that the intrusion take the form of a physical trespass. This can be met literally, but by physically entering onto private property, or by an electronic or optical intrusion, such as using zoom lenses or highly sensitive microphones to photograph or record a person who has a reasonable expectation of privacy. A court would consider this a physical trespass if your use of ultra-powerful or highly sensitive equipment was the only way you were able to obtain your information or recording. The second element requires that the actions giving rise to a claim must be offensive to a reasonable person. This requires more than mere discomfort or embarrassment. For example, barging in on someone in the bathroom and photographing them using the facilities would be offensive to a reasonable person, while taking a picture of them standing at the mirror combing their hair likely would not be offensive. The third element requires that the intrusion involves a private matter. Generally speaking, if you've intruded into someone's seclusion in a place they've expected privacy, or while they are engaged in an activity that most reasonable people would expect to be private, this element will be met. The fourth element requires that the intrusion must have resulted in mental anguish or suffering for the person whose privacy was invaded. This suffering can come from surprise, fright, or even anger at having been disturbed. In the case of surreptitious invasions, it can also come from the plaintiff finding out after the fact that his or her privacy had been invaded. The degree of anguish or suffering the plaintiff experiences will determine the amount of damages he or she is entitled to if the other elements of intrusion claims are established. In most states, you can be sued for publishing private facts about another person, even if those facts are true. The term private facts refers to information about someone's personal life that has not previously been revealed to the public, that is not of legitimate public concern, and the publication of which would be offensive to a reasonable person. For example, writing about a person's HIV status, sexual orientation, or financial troubles could lead to liability for publication of private facts. However, the law protects you when you publish information that is newsworthy, regardless of whether someone else would like you to keep the information private. In addition, the law protects you if you publish information already exposed to the public eye, and especially material obtained from publicly available court records. Despite the law's substantial protections for legitimate reporting on matters of public interest, it is a good practice to obtain consent before publishing sensitive private information about someone. Only human beings, and not corporations or other organizations, can sue for publication of private facts. Publication of private facts is a type of invasion of privacy, and you cannot invade the privacy of a dead person. Therefore, an estate cannot sue you for publishing private facts about a dead person unless your publication took place before the person in question died. Note, however, that members of a dead person's family may be able to sue in their own right if you disclose private facts that relate directly to them. Intentional infliction of emotional distress is sometimes referred to as the tort of outrage. In some cases, the circumstances of termination are so cruel, intimidating, and severe that an employee suffers extreme emotional upset. In certain instances, it is unlawful for an employer to deliberately cause an employee serious emotional harm. You may have been treated unlawfully if the employer's conduct toward you was extreme and outrageous, beyond the bounds of acceptable conduct in a civilized society, intended to, or could reasonably be foreseen to, cause a reasonable person serious emotional trauma, and actually the cause of severe and serious emotional distress for you. The law does not protect against mere insult. The focus for this kind of claim is on the outrageousness of the conduct and the severity of the emotional distress that results. Being fired on the spot and escorted out of the building by security in front of all of your former co-workers is probably not enough, alone, to constitute intentional infliction of serious emotional distress. Being handcuffed without justification or being subjected to repeated racial slurs or severe sexual harassment may constitute an outrage that can be remedied.